everyone. Thank you for joining me for this Hope and Healing series, where I will be addressing what I believe to be are the 5 main causes of any mental health problems, which are namely neurotoxicity, nutrient deficiency, hormone balance, structural brain damage, and of course the psychosocial and emotional components that can contribute to any mental health crisis. In this series, I'm going to be interviewing experts in each of these subjects who will hopefully give you the tools and information that you need so you can go forward and create your own healing and mental wellness plan. Hi, everyone. We're excited to have with us today Bonnie J. Kaplan, PhD. She's here to talk to us about the effects of nutrition and mental health. And just to give you a bit of a background, Bonnie was born and raised in the US. After doing all her training there at the University of Chicago and Brandeis University in experimental and physiological psychology, she began to pursue her interest in the biological basis of behavior. This led her to do postdoctoral training in neurophysiology at the West Haven VA Hospital Neuropsychology Laboratory and Yale University Department of Neurology, where she remained on faculty until moving to Canada in 1979. Since then, she has been a professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She has published widely on the biological basis of developmental disorders and mental health, particularly the contribution of nutrition to brain development and brain function. In 2017, she was named one of the top 150 difference makers in Canada for the area of mental health. She has also recently been honored by being nominated for a Top 7 Over 70 award for the Calgary area, and she has been shortlisted for the Dr. Rogers Prize for Complementary and Alternative Medicine for all of Canada. So thank you, Bonnie, for being with us today. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to it, Jocelyn.
Yeah, we've spoken a little bit in the past, so I know that we have an interest in nutrition in common. Yours is a lot more in depth than mine is, but I did sort of self-study a lot of this kind of thing back actually when my son was born premature and developed some health problems. I really started looking into nutrition, researching all these things, and then I started hearing about your work, and it was really validating actually to hear all of this stuff that I've been saying for years be said by somebody who's such a legitimate researcher such as yourself. So can you tell me, how did you get into this? What sparked this interest for you with regard to nutrition and mental health?
Well, it's been sparked 3 or 4 times, and I kept changing my mind. But I really, because I was interested in the biological basis of behavior, I have always believed it was important to understand how the brain works. And Jocelyn, it's bizarre, but not even in medical school are people taught what nutrients do in the brain, and they should be taught in elementary school. And I actually have been teaching as low as down to the 6th grade on that recently. And so
that's fantastic.
I just got involved in the 1980s and doing some research on the food additive issue, did a randomized controlled trial of that. Then I just went on to some other things because there were some roadblocks in the way, and then I went into behavior genetics, which is still very relevant, but came back to nutrition again when I became aware that there were some people in southern Alberta who were apparently fixing pretty severe mental health problems using some off-the-shelf, over-the-counter minerals and vitamins. And there were a lot of obstacles there too, but I've been studying that now for 20 years.
That's interesting. So really, it sounds like it was somebody else who kind of had started pioneering this a little bit, nutrient therapy and that kind of thing. And you thought, wow, this is looking effective. Let's look into that.
It looked more effective than what I had been doing in the 1980s. And when I searched the literature, it made sense to me that it was more effective. And they needed somebody who knew something about mental function, who was interested in nutrition. And the fact is that then and also now, I think I'm still the only clinical research psychologist, clinical researcher in all of Canada who has a particular focus in nutrition. It just hasn't caught on here very much.
Why do you think there's such a deficit in this field? Because, we'll go a bit more into this later, but your research is so compelling. I mean, the effect that nutrition has on mental health is so great. It seems like there should be a huge interest in this.
You're right, and there are so many answers to that question, Jocelyn. I'll give you just two answers. One is really it's because of education. It's not lack of education, it's education. I'm part of an entire generation of people who were taught just eat a balanced diet, dairy, and you'll be fine. And that just isn't true for many people. And it's less and less true now with decreased minerals in the soil resulting in lower nutrient content in our food. So that was one big obstacle. I mean, when I was trained to believe that minerals and vitamins could not have a significant impact on mental health. So when I first met these people in southern Alberta who were claiming, well, they weren't just claiming, I met the people and they were transformed. It took, I mean, I first wouldn't even meet with them. And when I finally met with them, these are gentlemen named Tony Stephan and the late David Hardy, and Autumn Stringham, Tony's daughter. When I first met them, I just had to rearrange everything that I had learned. And that's hard for people to do. And as recently as a couple of years ago, I've had psychiatrists, I wish I had $1 for every time a psychiatrist has said to me, Bonnie, minerals and vitamins, I mean, they're important for health, but they don't do much for the brain, do they? And I go, oh my God, we're not learning it in medical school. So why don't I stop there? That is a very big reason. There's one other one, but maybe it's a little too technical. But
Well, if I think we could go a little bit into this, because first of all, I'd like
okay.
to know, um, how does this affect our mental health? How do
Okay.
things like, I don't know, copper and magnesium make a
Right.
difference in somebody's depression or bipolar, or the labels, that we give to mental illness?
Okay, so now I'm going to talk for a while because I'm going to tell you the second reason because it
Okay.
is a good segue into answering that question.
Okay.
So a second really major obstacle we had to overcome is something called the scientific method. And I'm a scientist. It's the way I was trained. And the scientific method says you intervene if you're doing a treatment of any kind. You change one variable at a time and you look at the outcome. And you might look at the outcome in terms of the impact on several variables, but you do not ever do more than one intervention at a time. It's called an independent variable. So that is why from the 1920s till the year 2000, there were all kinds of studies on nutrition and mental health, and my colleagues and I reviewed that. If anyone's interested in the review article, um,
Yeah, and I will post some links so
we
that
post them.
people can look at, your
So
research and articles.
I'll make a note here of which ones I'm promising you, okay?
Okay.
So we reviewed that literature because we were amazed to find out there were a lot of hints that nutrients affected mental health. But what changed in the year 2000 is people said, why don't we just give the brain everything it needs instead of affecting just one pathway at a time? And so the breakthrough of these two gentlemen from southern Alberta is that they were not trained in, higher level science. They don't have PhDs, and so they just thought, well, we know that farm animals are treated very well with nutrition. Racehorses are treated with nutrition, and it's never one nutrient at a time. It's never that single treatment. It's the broad spectrum of everything known to be important for that function. So that was the second obstacle, is getting people to accept the idea of treating with a broad spectrum. And the first, I would say 10 years of my research, I constantly fielded questions from people who would look at the list of ingredients that we were using and would say, well, which is the important one? And I think, oh my God, I have to start teaching people about brain metabolism. And that comes to your second, what you were just asking me. So I have a 4-minute video. I'll give you that link.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think I do have that actually, because
yeah. Oh, you do? Okay. So that explains a very basic aspect of brain metabolism, actually of metabolism all over the body, but we're talking about the brain.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and that would be good for anybody to watch if they want to
yeah.
understand this a little bit more in depth. So I'll post a
And
link to that.
if you look at those graphs, do you remember seeing one particular nutrient, Jocelyn, that you thought was particularly important?
Not one in particular.
No,
No.
every neurotransmitter, I think your audience probably knows what a neurotransmitter is. They're the chemicals that make or enable our brain cells to talk to each other. And we have to synthesize them in our brains, and we have to also break them down into byproducts, and that's all what metabolism is. And in order to do that, you have to if you want to get from chemical A to chemical B, you need an enzyme, and these are called enzymatic reactions. But enzymes don't work alone. Enzymes are dependent upon cofactors, and if they don't have enough cofactors, they're slow, they're sluggish, or maybe they don't even work at all. And guess what the cofactors are? They're every single mineral and vitamin you've ever heard of. And so you can look at the serotonin transmitter pathway, the dopamine transmitter pathway, and I'm talking about both the creation of them, the production of them, and also the breakdown. And you'll find a whole host of vitamins and minerals. And if you are not feeding your brain those minerals and vitamins every hour of your life, I mean, an entire quart of blood is feeding your brain with those nutrients and oxygen and other things. If you're not providing those nutrients adequately to your brain, those pathways will not work well. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you. And that was a really great description. Thank you. I did work for a little while as a supplement counselor with this local health food place here in
Oh,
Utah. And, that was one thing I had learned in my research is that, you can't just go into a health food store, say, and just take vitamin C, a bunch of vitamin C or a bunch of niacin or something. I mean, you can,
you
and they
can.
sell that and they say, oh, it helps with this and it helps with that. And maybe a little boost in my experience can kind of boost someone for a bit. But what you're missing when you take that niacin is all the other B vitamins and all the other cofactors that aren't really necessarily even included in these supplements that affect how you metabolize that vitamin, how you metabolize the other vitamins that support it, right? All these
Right.
things. And so in some ways, it can almost be counterproductive because you could actually be depleting yourself, because of the energy that it takes to try and utilize that supplement. Would you say that's correct?
I'm trying to think of an example of that, Jocelyn, and I'm having trouble with it. Where it would
Well, try it
actually
according to
deplete.
Jocelyn, but
Yeah, maybe, but at any rate, you certainly can't utilize, you don't absorb, and you don't, they work together. I mean, if you look at a single step in one of those metabolic pathways, you'll usually find a minimum of 2 minerals and vitamins that are needed for that step, not
right,
just one. And some of them it's like 6 or more.
right.
So in that sense, they really work together.
Yeah, exactly. And so in the research that you've done, I'm interested. I mean, from my kind of layperson understanding, what you're really studying is giving somebody what most people think of as like a really comprehensive multivitamin. Is that actually?
Multivitamin mineral.
Yeah, multivitamin mineral. So what kinds of things would that include?
Well, could I say something about how we about our food, because it kind of relates to this.
Okay.
I've been speaking to a lot of agricultural groups in the last few years and going to conferences and just being invited to, they want to know how what they're doing to try to improve the soil is important for human health. And so I talk about, why we need these things in our brains. And so I've learned from them that our plants need approximately 15 minerals, okay, in order to grow well and to do what they have to do. Some people say 16 because they get carbon from here and there. Usually the carbon is just a given. At any rate, let's use the number 15. What do those plants do with the 15 vitamins that's important for human health? What they do is they manufacture vitamins. The vitamins are not in the soil. It's the plants absorb the minerals, they use the minerals, and they do a lot of things, of course, photosynthesis and growing, etc. But
Yeah.
from our perspective, what's important is they synthesize vitamins, and it's approximately 15 vitamins. So rounding the numbers, um, we end up, if we're getting adequate food, and that's a real question we can talk about, then we should be getting approximately 30 minerals and vitamins. And we have a few hints from the literature that in terms of mood and mental health, the minerals are almost, I don't want to say more important, but maybe they're underappreciated. That's why when someone says take a multivitamin, I always throw in minerals.
Mineral,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. And speaking about the food, that's something I also, I remember reading about back in the day, how really we are, it's almost impossible in some ways, living in modern society, to get all the nutrients that we need in our diets. Because like you mentioned, when you study the soil, it seems like we don't have the same kind of soil that we used to have
That's
100,
right.
200 years ago. And so we're eating those plants and we're not getting that nutrition, or, things like that. And so, it becomes, I think it's almost hard for most people who don't study this to comprehend this concept that you can somehow be nutrient deficient when you're living with all this abundance and all this food right at your fingertips. But do you think that's what's going on? Do you think that's why there's so much mental health concern going on right now?
I think that's a huge part of it. And I just want to add one little footnote. I tend to focus a lot on minerals and vitamins because that's when we eat the plants, we are mostly getting minerals and vitamins, or we eat the animals that eat the plants. But we mustn't forget that we also need essential fatty acids like the omega-3s, and we also need protein, etc. Just so your audience doesn't think I'm saying they're not important. They're all important, but I think minerals and vitamins have not been understood well enough. Yeah.
Yeah, just the other day, there was that story about this kid in the UK who was only eating basically fast food or processed foods, and
Right.
he ended up losing his eyesight and going deaf. I mean,
Yeah.
and can you imagine what that did to his mental health along
Yeah.
with just his physical health?
That's right. I mean, basically, those are examples of inadequate nutrients for a growing central nervous system. And I'm very aware I have a lot of connections in the autism world, and we have a number of people who eat like that, and they look cadaverous. You know what I mean? Really, they have pallor, they have no color, and they are eating, well, we call it the beige diet.
Right.
Or the brown diet. They're just, potatoes and I don't know, these things called chicken fingers, which probably don't have many nutrients. But, I can throw in some scientific data on this too, and it's very disturbing. I'm sure there's data like this in the States also, but I just know the Canadian data that came out recently. It came out in 2017. We do a cross-Canada Canadian community health survey every couple of years, and different kinds of questions are asked from a randomized sample stratified by, across the whole country, different ages, and, covering everyone. It's very well done by epidemiologists. And in 2017, a paper was published that looked at the dietary intake as reported by the people in that year, according to something, well, what you talked about, Jocelyn, processing. So if you look at the World Health Organization definitions of in this category, they have whole foods up here. Think of it as levels, okay? At the bottom, they have ultra-processed food, and in between, some people say there's one like minor processing. I think World Health Organization uses 2 levels, like a little bit of processing, more processing. You know, like a little bit of processing might be if don't have fresh peas, you have frozen, and they might have a single preservative added to them, that kind of thing. Anyway, here's the result of the study. 48%, which I will round to 50, okay? Half of the nutrient intake in our country is in the lowest level, ultra-processed foods. Now, what is that? Fast food doesn't begin to describe it, because we have a lot of fast foods that you can assemble at home. You can go to the grocery store and get ready-made salads, etc. That's pretty fast, right? But the ultra-processed foods are the ones that are just made of chemicals. They're almost nutrient-free. So what that means is we have, since World War II, when we started processing food, the 1950s, we have eliminated half of the nutrient intake in terms of minerals and vitamins for our population. 50%. That's shocking.
That is
Yes, I
incredible.
think it's a major reason that we're having a mental health epidemic. It's not the only reason, but it's reduced our resilience to a lot of the environmental stressors that people say, well, those are the causes of mental health problems. And in my reality, I don't know if everyone's reality, in my reality, well, more resilient people can cope with those stressors better. And resilience is a function of nutrient intake.
Yeah, I've definitely seen what you're talking about, especially with kids who are autistic. I have a son who has stomach issues, and he has difficulty eating a lot of things, not just because of stomach issues, but due to allergies and allergic reactions and things like that.
Yeah.
And I won't go like too much into it, but I was finally able to find a supplement that he could take. It's similar to what you're talking about, where it has the broad spectrum. It has
Good.
all the micronutrients,
Right.
minerals and things like that he could absorb sublingually. And it was just
Oh, you're taking that one.
yes,
Fabulous.
you
Okay,
know what
that's a
I'm
real
talking about.
breakthrough. I do, because, you know, I've worked with large capsules for 20 years. In fact, pill swallowing of those large capsules such an impact on my studies that my students and I developed a new method to teach children how to swallow pills, and there's a training video on the web for it, and
Oh my
you know,
gosh,
being used
yes.
all over the world. But so much better to just put a delicious sweet powder in your mouth, and that's
It is.
brand new. So how's your son doing?
Well, we noticed a difference right away. He just looked more with it. His face looked better. He was more motivated and alert, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, I mean, here I am. I've been studying this just kind of on my own, but for well over a decade. And yet I couldn't help my son
Yeah.
to get the nutrition he needed because his health is just so complex. So I feel for the parents out there who have children who are autistic or who have health problems and are like, yeah, right, I'm trying to get my kids to eat a smoothie, right? But it is so crucial to health and to mental health. I just couldn't, I don't even know how I could stress that enough. So I know that some of the research that you've done have been on specific supplements through True Hope, correct?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's through them, because I've been an independent scientist. But the 2 gentlemen I mentioned, Tony and David, Tony Steffen and the late David Hardy, founded True Hope Nutritionals. And I was the first one to study their formula, and I helped guide them as to how to make sure that we did not follow the pattern of the pharmaceutical companies, where, in my opinion, in my lifetime, the pharmaceutical companies have completely corrupted the mental health scientific literature by funding the studies and funding people and buying and so on. And anyway,
Oh yeah. I
the
mean, we
point
could go
is,
on and on.
we could go on and on. Yeah, I know you know. At any rate, just so your listeners understand, the True Hope people and then the Hardy family split off and formed Hardy Nutritionals. They're both making these broad spectrum formulas, reviewed and approved by governments and so forth, and being studied in 3 countries so far. And none of the scientists is commercially affiliated with either company. We don't let them fund our research, and believe me, it would be nice to have a bit of money sometimes. And they don't control our data. They don't influence the publication or anything.
Yeah. And this is it correct to say it's double blind, placebo kind of research? It's peer reviewed research, correct?
It's all peer-reviewed. There are approximately 40 peer-reviewed publications now in the scientific and medical literature. And I hasten to add, we don't have a single study yet on that sublingual powder you were talking about, because that's been out only like 2 months. But I'm trying to find someone to study it, because I'm retired. I'm not starting studies anymore.
Yeah.
At any rate, they are not all placebo-controlled, because for a lot of reasons. One is that that's very expensive. I mean, a drug company spends at least $8 million on a placebo-controlled trial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and none of us has that kind of money. However, what we have is a natural progression in those 40 publications. We have some amazing case studies that are followed for years, and I mean, at least 4 years before being published, and with no regression, no reemergence of symptoms. We have case series, which means groups of patients with similar problems, and again, followed for a long time. We have database of analyses of over 300, I think 350 people. And then we have randomized controlled trials of 2 types, sometimes with placebos, and those have been done mostly by the New Zealand group, but also with comparators. So you might, and we do this with the drug companies do this with medications sometimes too, where they compare 2 drugs. And we would compare, and we have compared in several studies, one of the nutrient formulas to treatment as usual or to a single nutrient, etc. So we have a very rich scientific base now for saying, broad spectrum nutrients are very important.
And the reason why I asked that is I want my viewers to understand that the kind of research that you have put into this is really impressive. I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand how questionable a lot of the research on psychiatric drugs, which is usually what is used to treat mental health problems, the kind of research that you're doing. I mean, you've done it for years. You'll follow someone for years, and that doesn't happen a lot. I mean, especially before they put a drug out on the market. I mean, some of these things I'm seeing coming out are like 3-week studies, not 3-year studies.
Yeah, I thought they never went below 6 weeks. But anyway, Julia Ruckledge, who's running the New Zealand group, and who has the most productive research program right now, she has made a point to, and she doesn't have a lot of money because we don't get federal grants yet. So she has made a point for her placebo-controlled trials in ADHD, and she's got 1 in adults and 1 in children. She's done a whole lot of other analyses. One is doing 12-month follow-up, and it's amazing to see consistently in both groups of people that the people who stay on the micronutrients, meaning minerals and vitamins, a year later are doing way better than those who have gone to medication or those who are on medication consistently. There's just no comparison. I was going to say one other thing about that. It slipped my mind. So.
Oh, well, that's all right. The people at True Hope too, I know just a little bit about them. I'm not like doing an advertisement for True Hope here either.
No, and I try not to either.
Yeah. But I do know that they also have like a support for people who are trying to get off of their medications. They will use micronutrients, supplements, things like that, to help people get off, along with macronutrients, things like protein.
Whey powder, drinks, etc. Yeah.
Right. And it just makes sense. I mean, if you don't give your body and your brain the building blocks that it needs to repair, to heal, to function properly, how can we expect to do that? And I wish more doctors understood that. I wish they were introduced to more of that research, and that when it comes to mental health, that this would be a sort of a first line of defense, rather than the first thing we go to is putting someone on, again, kind of almost like what you're talking about, like one little thing in the brain that we sort of tweak just a little, and we don't understand how that fully affects everything. But rather than doing that, say, hey, let's just start with nutrition. Let's just see, because according to what Bonnie Kaplan says, not only are we getting maybe half of our food has nutrition, decent nutrition in it, but then that food is coming from plants that are coming from soils that may not have it
Depleted.
to begin with. So you could be, it's incredible. You could almost be starving and yet be getting tons of calories. And how does,
Right. Well,
incredible.
you've just described my fantasy world. I'll tell you why. People are always asking me, what is that supplement you're studying? And I don't call it a supplement. It is a supplement. It's supplementary to our food. But in my vision of a proper universe, every person, and especially every child with a developing brain, would have the opportunity to try everything about lifestyle first. Nutrition, decreasing screen time, fixing dysfunctional families. There's a job for you. At
Yeah.
any rate, but certainly nutrition, broad spectrum nutrition, improved diet first, and then maybe in pill form or powder. And that should be the primary treatment. Medication will be the supplement because there is a place for medication, especially in crises. I'm not blanket anti-medication. That would be stupid, I think. But it should be used only in a supplementary manner.
I agree, especially because the studies on these medications show they're just not really effective long-term treatments,
That's right.
possibly short-term
Crisis.
crisis kind of
Right.
thing. But then you get into the whole thing that I deal with the work I do, which is then getting these people off of these things. That's
Oh, so
almost,
let's talk about that for a minute.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So now that I'm retired, one of my keep the word withdrawal in mind because I'm going to come back to the withdrawal issue. One of the things that I did when I was preparing for retirement was I saw people leaving the field of nutrition and mental health, my field of doing the scientific research, because they couldn't fund their research, because we still have the large federal agencies still saying, well, this is a great study, but pick one nutrient. I mean, it's this scientific method. So I think there might be some breakthroughs within the next 5 years, but it's really been bad. So I set up 2 charitable funds. This is not a pitch for money, but it's relevant, okay? And I set up one in the US and one in Canada because our dollars are not equivalent. And there are people living in both countries and they both want to have charitable receipts, when they're paying their taxes. And my goal was to have maybe, $50,000 to kickstart one of the studies. Anyway, we're up to about $800,000 now.
Oh, wow.
And it is all dispersed. I'm not interested in building up the charitable funds. What we're doing is we have funded a little bit of the work in New Zealand. We have also funded a clinical trial in adults with bipolar disorder, which is ongoing in Maine in the US. And that's, I think, about 3/4 of the way done. We have also funded a very important multi-center trial, which involves 2 centers in the U.S., Oregon Health and Sciences University and Ohio State University. And the third site is in Alberta, so it's cross international borders. It's University of Lethbridge. And these scientists are replicating some of the work with ADHD and mood instability that came out of some of the trials that Julia Ruckledge has done in New Zealand, but they're helping expand a very important issue, and that is the mechanism. What, can we say something about the microbiome as a result of giving nutritional treatment? And Julia's actually just published the first pilot study on that, showing improved diversity in the gut, but it's a small sample so far. What can we say about a whole variety of other physiological changes? So they're moving forward, my junior colleagues across North America and New Zealand, to improving the scientific value of clinical trials by understanding more about what nutrients do. But the one area that kind of irks me that we haven't found anyone to really do a study on yet is withdrawal, because guess what? You look at those 40 studies, every single one of them, including the multi-center trial now, requires that people be medication free. And there's a reason for that, because what we've observed clinically and True Hope people have known from the beginning is that if you give a very effective nutrient formula, then you are amplifying the effect of the medication. So what used to be an appropriate therapeutic dose becomes an overdose. And what the public doesn't know is that an overdose of a psychiatric medication can look like breakthrough symptoms. It can be hard to distinguish. So anyway, I would love to have somebody do some research on withdrawal, because all of us know that people who are given additional nutrients do better with withdrawal. And if you're taking a formula which doesn't help with withdrawal or doesn't amplify the effect of the psychiatric medication you're on, it's probably not a very good formula, or you're not getting enough of it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's kind of an
And so we
interesting
know
measuring.
they interact. Yeah.
Yeah, because they
Sorry for the
do.
long answer.
Oh, no, that's totally
Yeah.
fine. And I get what you're saying. I mean, just the research in general on psychiatric drug withdrawal is pretty abysmal. There's not a lot, which is why patients turn to lay people like myself on the internet for advice and help, because really the doctors have no understanding of this. But I'm glad that you're here to discuss the role of nutrition, even if there's not a lot of research for that in withdrawal, because like we discussed, really just logically, your brain just needs certain things to heal. And I've seen it with people, whether they just all of a sudden switch to some sort of a paleo diet or some kind of, even vegan or vegetarian. And my thoughts on this are, when they say this has really helped me, it's probably because they're consuming a lot more fruits and vegetables and natural, organic, nutrient-dense foods than they were before. And that is likely a huge part of what's helping those people.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, basically, they're moving up that ladder toward whole foods, whole good foods, and we know that that's very important.
Have you seen? Have you seen very specific? Have you seen like huge breakthroughs? You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but that people do better, obviously, than others. Do you have any specific examples you could give us?
Sure, I could tell you some examples. Let me say one more thing about withdrawal, because I don't know who's going to be listening to this, and it might be useful. I did approach some colleagues in the States and say, look, do you have a place that's doing rehabilitation, withdrawal, etc.? There are a lot of treatment centers around. Someone who could do some research. Can we set up a withdrawal study, even from opioids? I mean, from anything. And we could see whether or not we could prove, just do a study, whether we could prove that enhanced nutrition enables withdrawal symptoms to be minimized. So I ended up with a center in, I'll say the state, but not the city, in Colorado, and they just weren't interested in doing it. They don't really do research. So if any of your listeners know of a setting where there's a good science, you'd have to have someone who can do clinical trials and that kind of thing. I might be able to find funding to help make it happen, because I think it's an important step.
Yes, please. Let's get this research done. Let's do it.
Okay, yeah, that's my job now, is knowledge translation and fostering research. So to answer your question, you want a few anecdotes. Some are published as those very careful case studies. I'll tell you one that will never be published, and it's for an interesting reason why. Almost 2 years ago, it'll be 2 years next month in October, a gentleman who my family knows was at our home for a reason unrelated to mental health or anything, but he looked really stressed, and even though we didn't know him well, he kind of unburdened himself of what was going on in his family. And what was going on is that he had two adorable little children, aged 4 and 6. His 4-year-old daughter was wonderful. His 6-year-old son was wonderful at school, but because he was holding it in, but he would come home and have meltdown after meltdown. And these parents are fairly educated. They had been through parenting programs, behavior management programs, and their marriage was under stress, and they could not figure out why this was happening. And it was, of course, the school system, it made the parents look bad, right? Well, he's fine in school. What are you doing wrong at home?
Right. So, and hence, I just want to interject, is the pressure to find an immediate solution. Like, get this person on medication because you got to take care of this now, you know.
That's right. They were pressured to take medication, and that's a tough one for a parent to resist. At any rate, this fellow did not know about my research, so I started telling him about it, and then he came to one of my lectures, and to make a long story short, he said, look, I do data, he does some data analysis in his field. I'm going to set up a spreadsheet. I said, you know, this is up to you. I don't have ethics approval for a protocol for your child. I have to be careful of that. You're not in a study. This is just like a neighbor talking over the fence to a neighbor, and I can tell you what to try. And I also don't know if it's going to help him because I don't know your son, and we don't know ahead of time. We can't predict who will respond well. So he set up a data sheet monitoring the number of meltdowns, and he started on a Sunday, and I think there were 2 that day. And that evening they gave their son. And I don't remember which formula it was anymore. We didn't have the powder then, though. He's now switched to the powder, but some kind of one of the mineral formulas or something. And he has not had a meltdown since that night. So
Oh, wow.
there's no data to analyze, but it's a lovely anecdote. Oh, I just remembered, that's right. They went out and bought a mineral formula that was liquid from a health food store, but we quickly got him onto a broad spectrum then after he had to be taught to swallow pills, and he's a champion now. So we got him onto one of the broad spectrums so he'd get minerals and vitamins all in balance. And then recently I know he has switched to the powder because kids like the sweetness of it, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, he's doing fine, and I don't foresee. I think when he approaches puberty sometimes. How old is your son?
My son is 13, and we are right there.
Yes. Well, you cannot take puberty away with nutrients.
No,
Trust me.
unfortunately.
Yes, hormones are a pain in the neck for everyone. But certainly, I've seen people who needed to increase their doses for a period of time during puberty, and you might notice that.
That's interesting. I do have to also mention, so my daughter started taking it. She's taken kid vitamins, things like that, but I was noticing that she was very lethargic, and she's a high energy kind of person. Her sleep was getting a little bit worse too. Both my kids have sleep issues, but she was having a harder and harder time getting to sleep. So I started her on, we kind of go back and forth between this powder and the True Hope, which the powder one is kind of based on the True Hope
It is.
formula.
It's a spin-off company.
Right. So I started her, I think, on the True Hope pills and actually an iron supplement because I felt like that could be just part of her issue too. And right away, my daughter said, "Oh, I'm sleeping better."
Yeah, there's a study on that, and this is from the New Zealand group. This was not placebo controlled. It was a very different, called a multiple baseline design. It's a very rigorous design, and you can demonstrate that when the people start on the formula, and I don't remember if they were using Empower Plus by True Hope or Daily Essential Nutrients by Hardy Nutritionals. We kind of group all the literature together, but they were able to show improved sleep as well as improved mood. So I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah. And just so I don't know if you are aware of this, a lot of people in the withdrawal community, especially benzodiazepines, that's my, I guess you could say, expertise, have great difficulty taking vitamins. Particularly B vitamins seem to really aggravate or irritate symptoms. And again, it could be because people aren't getting maybe the correct balance, or I don't know what. And for my son, that always seems to have been the case. Even with True Hope, I did try that. But for some reason, taking it sublingually doesn't seem to irritate. And my personal opinion, just from what I understand, it probably has more to do with the gut and the biome, all that whole thing that you were kind of talking about, being off balance. But yeah, my daughter's only 9 years old, and she comes back and reports to me that she's sleeping better. So I'm a huge fan. I'm so glad that I found your research actually years ago. Didn't quite know how to incorporate it for my son, but now we're finding a way, and it's making a huge difference. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Okay. You're welcome. I wanted to mention that the other company, they split in two about 6 years ago. the Hardy family is running the other company called Hardy Nutritionals. They are coming out with also a new and better powder. I haven't had a chance to taste it yet, but it gets mixed into a drink. Both companies have had those in the past, but they were kind of yucky, but they think they have solved that problem. So, I mean, it would be lovely someday if we could have both a drink and a powder and capsules, and people can choose. If you're traveling, maybe it's easier to carry the capsules with, I don't know, when you're at home, you might occasionally want it in a good drink. Who knows? So, but the point is they're all broad spectrum. They all have over 30 vitamins and minerals, a few amino acids, etc.
Yeah, and they're all really essential
Oh
to
yeah.
health. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I keep beating that dead horse, but
Yeah. It's not dead.
no, it's not dead, is it?
No,
Not if it's
no.
getting the proper nutrition, anyway.
Yeah.
But well, I just wanted people to know, when I first reached out to you about doing this interview, I was trying to be very like, let's discuss the subject. And Bonnie, you kept asking me about, well, what about your health and your past, and what about your son? And we kept going back to us. And so to me, that just really reflects that you really do care. It's not like, this is an interesting subject to study. I mean, it is obviously, but I can really tell that you really do care about people. You care about individuals. You want to help people.
I think you could talk to every one of the scientists in the 3 countries I mentioned, plus, well, of course, some psychiatrists, integrative psychiatrists who are using broad spectrum formulas, but you will find that every one of them has seen a life transformed. And I don't know how anybody walks away from that. It's important. It's
Yeah.
very important.
And I know exactly what you mean. When you find something like that, you just want to shout it from the rooftops, like, listen to me, people, because
Yeah.
it's, you don't have to suffer act like
No.
you're suffering. So I get that. So just to kind of, as we finish up this interview, I'm going to throw you a little curveball.
Okay.
Um, so I know obviously your focus is nutrition, and that is what you do, but I want to ask you, in your experience with all of this and working with all the people that you've worked with, how important is hope
Oh,
to people?
well, I guess I remember when Tony and David named their company True Hope, and I groaned because I knew to my professional colleagues how corny it would sound. And I used to say that. They say, who makes that formula? And I'd say, well, they call their company True Hope. And I know it sounds a little corny, but that's how they feel because they have seen lives transformed. Obviously, hope is very important. And a lot of the people who resort to nutrients, the micronutrient formulas, have lost hope. It's kind of their last chance. It should be offered to them first. That's how it should be. May I tell you one more historical fact that
Oh, please, yes.
actually 2 more if you don't mind. I don't if this goes on too long, you can shorten it later.
Yeah.
But as a result of my getting involved in this, I've really done a lot of looking at history, and I have one of the lectures I have on the internet actually is about 45 minutes about the history. I trace it back 2,600 years, knowing that nutrition was affecting mental function. But the 2 examples I'm going to give you are from the 20th century, so not that long ago. One is that we know from the People's Home Library that people understood that nutrition was relevant for mental health. What is the People's Home Library? You can look it up on the web, but I can tell you that anybody homesteading in Western US or Western Canada had these books on their bookshelves because they had no access to their parents back in the East. They had no access to doctors. They had no access to veterinarians. Excuse me. And so they used the People's Home Library, which was the conventional wisdom of the time, to find out how to treat burns, how to take care of a home, how to make jam. It's unbelievable. And in there, you can just look up mental illness, and you'll find mental illness is due to imperfect nutrition. Feed them better. And that was 1910. And that was before we had I call them the clinical practice guidelines of the 20th century.
Wow, that is
That's
fascinating.
one story.
Yeah.
The second one has to do with some post-World War II studies done at the University of Minnesota. After World War II, there was a spell where there were a lot of studies on nutrition and starvation, really, because of the starvation hunger winters in Holland, because when the camps were opened and the people who had survived the concentration camps, often you couldn't just feed them again or it killed them. So people were trying to understand a lot of things about starvation. And one study that was published in 1950 took a group of young undergraduate, all males, I think there were about 20 of them as I recall, and put them on a diet that was 50% of normal nutrient intake and caloric nutrient intake. And they studied a lot about their physical health, but somebody studied also some mental health variables and reported the symptoms that resulted after just 24 weeks on this 50% diet. Remember I said that 50% of our countries now are not getting 50% of the nutrients they need. So that's very important. But here's what they found. They found all the symptoms of depression. They found all the symptoms of anxiety. And they found some of the symptoms of ADHD. They didn't have that word then, but lack of focus, inattention, etc. Some people, one or two, had psychotic episodes. So what are we doing in our populations now?
Yeah,
It's really worrisome.
especially to children. I think we
Absolutely.
are. It's like I see a lot of adults will maybe make the effort to eat healthy for fitness reasons or whatever,
Right.
and then the kids are getting, like you said, those chicken nuggets, things like that.
Yeah.
And I personally, honestly, just locally, am seeing an epidemic of anxiety among our youth and children.
Yeah, this anxiety thing is an interesting one. First of all, I want your listeners to know that there is a body of literature on the group of vitamins called B complex
Hmm.
showing increased resilience to stress and anxiety. But sometimes B vitamins, as you pointed out, might be a little too energizing.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of people whose anxiety gets better on one of the broad spectrum formulas, but doesn't resolve as well as meltdowns, mood dysregulation, the ups and downs, etc. And so there are some other natural ingredients that people use, like inositol, which is a sugar which is in all of our cells. There are things like that that people do, and mindfulness and
Yeah, of
meditation,
course.
etc. But you're right, there's an awful lot of anxiety out there.
Yeah, and I'm not saying everything is 100% nutrition,
No,
but
I'm not either.
yeah, I think it goes back to hope,
Yeah,
which is, if because what I have seen in my own personal experience with other people is maybe that first step that people take is, and in my opinion, should be nutrition. And once they take that first step, almost everybody does see some kind of improvement. They do see some benefit because most of us are nutrient deficient. And then once they have that, that does give people the hope. It does give them the motivation, and it, quite frankly, it gives them the physical capacity to then go on and then pursue some of the other avenues related to mental wellness, which I hope to be discussing in future interviews with other people, researchers
right.
such as yourself.
But
So
nutrition is foundational.
I agree, Bonnie, completely.
That's another study we should do. What
Yeah.
happens if before somebody starts mindfulness or psychotherapy or whatever, you improve their nutrition? We've been told anecdotally that they're finally able to make use of what they learned. So
Right.
nutrition is number one, foundational, because it's who we are. I swear there are people who think their cells just exist on nothing,
I've seen that too.
but
Well,
they haven't
well,
been taught.
energy shots and protein drinks,
Oh,
apparently.
jeez.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm going to throw this in, just another anecdotal thing while we're here.
yeah,
So a lot of so in my church, we send people out on missions, and a lot of them are around the age of 18 and 19 and 20.
right,
And they go out and they serve all over the world. And some of these places are places like Africa, where the food is very different. And my aunt, she works as a missionary who's older, and she works with older missionaries. And two of these women that she works with, their focus is nutrition. One is uh, a nutritionist, and the other one I think is a nurse. And they'll send them into these missions where these young missionaries are just having, again, epidemics of depression and anxiety, and they're doing terribly, and they're coming home, they can't finish these missions, and they're finding that these kids basically are living off of energy drinks, or that when they're living in places that you can't just go to the store and pick up a microwave meal, they have no idea what to eat.
Yeah, right.
And so they're what they've been doing is they just go in, they teach them, hey, eat some meat and vegetables, it's not that hard, get off the caffeine, and boom, all of a sudden their
Right.
anxiety and depression gets better. So I've definitely seen that. I think, like you said, we need to be doing this in elementary school. I know I've taught my kids this from the time they were young. Look, you can have a treat. It's okay. You can do these
Right.
things, but that's not a meal. That's not a daily thing. Feed your body what it needs, and then if you want to have a treat, great, do that.
Right.
But
Good
yeah.
for you.
Thanks. Well,
Okay.
thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really think that this is just going to be a light bulb moment for so many people. And whether it's in that they need to supplement or change their diet or start down whatever kind of path, maybe it's eliminating certain foods. I really think and I hope that this will help a lot of people. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Bonnie. We'll
Okay.
see you. Bye.
Bye.